Nosotras hablamos español. We speak Spanish. After today's episode, you'll be able to use nosotros, ellos, and ustedes to unlock thousands more sentences in Spanish just by learning how to conjugate we, they, and you all in the present tense.
Welcome to Spanglish Friends, the podcast for true beginner Spanish learners.
Hola amigos, I'm Val, your co-host and experienced Spanish teacher from Venezuela.
And I'm Em, your Australian co-host who's been learning Spanish for 10 years.
Our goal is simple, to get you confident listening and speaking in beginner Spanish with content you'll actually use in real-life conversations.
Join the Spanish Friends community by subscribing wherever you listen to podcasts and following us on social media at Spanglish_Friends. Let's get started.
Comencemos.
Hola, hola, Spanglish amigos. Buen día.
Buenos dias. Hello, friends, and welcome if this is your first time listening to our podcast.
Today, in episodio 22, we are diving into more regular verbs conjugations in the present tense. Remember that verbs are our action words, like to speak, to run, to sing. All of these are verbs. We taught you back in episode 18 that there are three types of verbs in Spanish. Verbs that end in ar, in er, or in ir. And learned how to start conjugating these verbs in the present tense, which means changing those verbs' endings to unlock many useful Spanish sentences.
That's right. So today's episode is part 2 of this verb conjugation masterclass in the present tense. So if you haven't already, I'd highly recommend you head back and listen to episode 18 first, part 1, and then we'll meet you back here. In part 2, we're going to be going through 3 more essential conjugations that you need to know as a beginner.
With these conjugations, you'll be able to say sentences like, we speak in English, and ask questions like, do you all speak Spanish? Do they sing, or do you all live in Australia?
That's right, talking about groups of people. So the 3 questions, the 3 preguntas we're answering today, Spanglish Friends, are pregunta número 1, how do you conjugate nosotros, which means we? Pregunta número 2, how do you conjugate ustedes and vosotros, which both mean you all in Spanish, but we're going to explain why we have 2 different pronouns. And pregunta número 3, how do you conjugate ellos and ellas, which means they in Spanish?
Woohoo! Let's begin with a conversación pequeña to bring these concepts to life. What do you think, Em?
Absolutamente, Val. And in today's conversation, you'll hear almost all of those new pronouns being used, nosotros, ellos, and ustedes.
First time through, just listen and see what familiar words you already know that you can catch.
Yes, and then we're going to teach you all the theory you need to understand the new pronouns and conjugations we teach you. We'll then play the conversation a second time before we break it down line by line. Are you ready, mi amiga?
Sí, amiga, estamos listas. Comencemos.
Val, ¿qué hacen tú y tus amigos los fines de semana?
Hola, Em. Nosotros cantamos karaoke los sábados. ¿Y ustedes?
Nosotros comemos pizza y jugamos juegos de mesa.
Oh, qué divertido. ¿Y tus padres qué hacen ellos?
Ellos ven películas y caminan por el parque.
Ah, qué chévere. Can you believe, Spanglish friends, in just under 10 minutes, you'll be able to understand that entire conversation in Spanish. Let's start the timer and dive into what you need to know, starting now.
And a quick refresher before we dive into our tres preguntas. To conjugate a verb in Spanish, remember that we first need to find the stem of the verb. Let's take, for instance, the verb hablar, which means to speak. Hablar. It's an AR verb, right? It ends in AR. So to find the stem, we remove the letters AR from the end and we're left with HABL, okay? Then we add the appropriate ending. In episode 18, we taught you, for example, for yo, which means I, you add an O at the end of the verb to make the conjugation, like yo hablo, which means I speak, like yo hablo español, I speak Spanish.
Great, Emmy. Let's begin with pregunta número uno. How do we say we in Spanish and how do we conjugate it?
All right. So for AR verbs in the present tense in Spanish, we're going to add AMOS to the stem of the verb amos. Okay. So, for example, the verb hablar, which means to speak, would become hablamos. For example, nosotros hablamos español means we speak Spanish.
Maravilloso. Now, for ER and IR verbs, we add hemos for ER, EMOS, hemos, and imos for IR verbs, IMOS, respectively. So, for example, the verb to eat, comer, becomes comemos. For example, nosotros comemos pan. We eat bread. Or vivir becomes vivimos. Nosotros vivimos aquí. We live here. Vivir is the verb to live.
That's right. So in summary, the conjugations for nosotros are amos for AR verbs, hemos for ER verbs, and imos for IR verbs. Pretty self-explanatory. It has the same letter as the ending, and then you just add mos.
On to pregunta número dos. How do we say you all in Spanish and how do we conjugate it?
Yes, and this is where there's two different options here and things get interesting because in Spain, they would use the word vosotros, the pronoun vosotros, for referring to a group of you all, saying you all do something or are something in all scenarios.
Exactly. In Latin America, on the other hand, people really don't use vosotros. No. Instead, we use ustedes for you all, both formal and informal. Let's focus right now in vosotros.
So how do we add to the stem, Profe Val, and conjugate vosotros in the present tense?
With vosotros, the endings are is, a with accent, is, for are verbs, for verbs that end in ar. For example, the verb to speak, hablar, with vosotros becomes vosotros habláis inglés. You all speak English. For er verbs, er, the endings is es, e with accent, is. So for example, the verb comer, to eat, becomes vosotros coméis pizza. You all eat pizza. And our last type of verbs, IR verbs, ir, the endings are is, I with an accent, and es. For example, with the verb vivir, if we want to conjugate it with vosotros, would be vosotros vivís aquí. You all live here.
And a quick tip, Spanglish friends. All of the conjugations for vosotros in the regular present tense have a little accent on either the letter before the I or the I itself. It's how you can tell pretty quickly that someone is using vosotros, the Spain form of you all.
And it's important to know that you won't need to use vosotros if you're focusing just Latin American Spanish, okay, amigos? But it's still very useful to understand when you hear it or you read it because it's common in textbooks. In translations from English to Spanish, you might read you all as vosotros.
That's right. And on to our third and final pregunta and conjugation for the day. How do we say they in the present tense? And our special friend from Latin America, ustedes, which is you all.
Remember that ellos means they for a group of guys or a mixed group. Ellas, on the other hand, is they for a group of just women. Okay?
The conjugation is going to be the same for both ellos and ellas, and also for ustedes as well.
For our verbs, AR, we add AM. For example, again, the verb hablar becomes hablan. So if I want to say that they speak in English, I can say ellos hablan inglés.
That's right. And for both ER and IR verbs, we add the same ending to say they, which is EN. So you could say comen. Ellas no comen pescado, which means they don't eat fish. Or with the verb vivir, which is an IR verb, you could say viven, adding en at the end of vivir, viven. An example sentence could be ellos viven en Australia.
Maravilloso. We are almost finishing, but now let's go back to ustedes. This word also uses those an, and en, and endings. That's why we added it to this category, even though it means you all, okay? Let's not confuse it. Ustedes means you all, not they. And ustedes is the you all for Latin America, but it's conjugated the same as ellos, they.
That's right. So if you're saying sentences like you all speak Spanish, for example, or you all speak English in Latin America, you'd say ustedes hablan. Ustedes hablan. You're using that same an conjugation at the end. Or you could say sentences like you all eat in Latin America. Ustedes comen.
Exactamente. Maravilloso. Let's summarize all our new verbs conjugation for regular verbs in the present tense before we replay our conversación pequeña. Entonces, amigos, in summary, the three things we want you to remember from today's learning are nosotros, nosotras, which means we. You add amos for our verbs, hemos for air verbs, and imos for ear verbs. An example could be hablar becomes hablamos, comer becomes comemos, and vivir becomes vivimos. Número dos, vosotros, vosotras, which means you all. In Spain, you add "-is" for our verbs, "-es" for air verbs, and "-es" for ear verbs. For example, hablar becomes habláis, comer becomes coméis, and vivir becomes vivís. Last one, número tres, ellos, ellas, and ustedes, which means they, ellos, ellas, and ustedes means you all in Latin America. You can add for our verbs an, for er and ir verbs, you can add en, en. And the same examples, hablar, ellos hablan, comer, ellas comen, vivir, ustedes viven. And remember, we post a summary on our Instagram every week. So head there to bookmark or save this lesson. The summary table for this one is so essential.
Spanglish friends, you've just unlocked thousands of sentences. Let's now revisit our conversación pequeña. This time when we play it, listen out and see if you can catch us this time, maybe using one or two of the new pronouns and conjugations that we've been speaking about. Can you try and maybe translate one of the sentences we say along the way? Are you ready again, Profe Val?
I love this idea, amiga. Sí, comencemos.
Val, ¿qué hacen tú y tus amigos los fines de semana?
Hola, nosotros cantamos karaoke los sábados. ¿Y ustedes?
Nosotros comemos pizza y jugamos juegos de mesa.
Oh, qué divertido. ¿Y tus padres qué hacen ellos?
Ellos ven películas y caminan por el parque.
Ah, qué chévere.
Okay, how did you go, friends? Did you catch anything that second time around? Let's break it all down so you can understand the conversation 100%. The first thing I said to Val was, ¿Qué hacen tú y tus amigos los fines de semana? I asked Val, what do you and your friends do on the weekends? Hacen is the ustedes form of the verb hacer, which means to do. I removed that er ending and I added en.
Then I responded, nosotros cantamos karaoke los sábados. And then I asked her, ¿y ustedes? So I said, we sing, nosotros cantamos karaoke on Saturdays, los sábados. And then I asked her, ¿y ustedes? And you all? Cantamos is nosotros form of cantar, the verb to sing.
That's right. And I responded to Val's question, nosotros comemos pizza y jugamos juegos de mesa. Breaking the sentence down, I said, nosotros comemos pizza. We eat pizza, using that hemos ending to say we eat pizza. Y jugamos comes from the verb jugar, which means to play. So I say jugamos juegos de mesa. Juegos de mesa means board games. So I said jugamos juegos de mesa and we play board games.
Then I responded with a very common expression, which is, oh, how fun, qué divertido. And I asked her, ¿y tus padres? I asked her about her parents. And your parents? ¿Qué hacen ellos? What do they do? Hacen is the ellos form of hacer, which means to do.
That's right. So she asked me, what do my parents do on the weekend? And I responded, ellos ven películas y caminan por el parque. Breaking the sentence down, I said, ellos ven. Ven comes from the verb ver, which means to watch, to see. So I said, ellos ven películas. Películas means movies. I said, they watch movies. Y, the joining word and, caminan por el parque. Caminar is the verb to walk, and I added an an at the end to say they walk in the park. Caminan por el parque.
Which finally I responded one of my favorite expressions, which is, qué chévere.
It's like, how cool, how awesome. It's commonly used expression in Colombia and Venezuela.
And that's it, Spanglish friends. You know now all the tools to understand that conversation in full. Now it's time for our reto of the week, our challenge of the week.
We want you to write in the comments one sentence practicing conjugating a verb with the pronouns we've taught you today. For example, you could use the verb cantar and you could say, nosotros cantamos todos los miércoles. We sing, cantar, adding amos at the end to make cantamos. We sing todos los miércoles, every Wednesday. We can't wait to see your answers practicing conjugating these verbs in the comments.
Love this reto, Emmy. Thank you. And a spoiler alert, Spanglish friends, next week we are diving into the weather in Spanish. El clima. You'll learn how to say things like it's sunny, it's rainy, it's cloudy, and much more.
Another key milestone into sounding more natural in your Spanish conversation as a beginner. Ciao, ciao. Muy bien hecho, amigos. Very well done.
Nos vemos. Tune in next week, Spanglish friends. Hasta la próxima. Ciao, ciao. Thank you for listening to Spanglish Friends. We are both so proud of the time you're investing to level up your Spanish listening and speaking skills.
If you've enjoyed today's episode, follow us and give the show a rating wherever you listen to podcasts. Or even better, tell a friend about the show. It's how we can help even more people on their Spanish learning journeys and continue to grow our awesome, supportive community.
Don't forget to check out our socials, including Instagram and TikTok at Spanglish_friends for even more beginner Spanish fun.
Congratulations on taking another step today towards your Spanish learning goals. Ciao, Spanglish amigos. Until next time.
Hasta la próxima, amigos.